Right, I want to move on to talk about the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has refuted claims overnight that Jeffrey Epstein was ever working for Mossad. The claims, of course, have been popularised by people like Tucker Carlson, who told an audience in Florida on Friday that everyone he knows in Washington, D.C. believes the notorious sex trafficker was working for the Israeli government. Tucker Carlson said, quote, "I've never met anyone who doesn't think that. I don't know any of them that hate Israel, but no one feels they can say it." But yesterday, Naftali Bennett posted a statement on X saying, quote, "As a former Israeli Prime Minister, with Mossad having reported directly to me, I say to you with 100% certainty the accusation that Jeffrey Epstein somehow worked for Israel or Mossad running a blackmail ring is categorically and totally false." Meanwhile, President Donald Trump just wishes people would stop talking about Epstein, who was found dead in his jail cell 6 years ago.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
And Trump posted on Truth Social yesterday, quote, "What's going on with my boys and in some cases gals? They're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi, who is doing a fantastic job. We're one team, MAGA, and I don't like what's happening. We have a perfect administration, the talk of the world, and selfish people are trying to hurt it, all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein." Sean, Trump created huge expectation that the public would get all the details about Epstein's crimes. Now he's berating the public for wanting all the details about Epstein's crimes.
Yeah, governing can be a little different sometimes when you are faced with the reality of what the office bears. And look, I think that there's a situation here where there may not be a list. And from the people that I've talked to at the highest levels, it appears that there's no actual client list. Again, this really has never been my issue. That being said, I think that what the government needs to do under Donald Trump is explain and be a little bit more transparent about what information there is. We know that there are very lewd and inappropriate imagery and videos that exist, and they need to explain why that can't be released. And then secondly, there's a lot of information about people who were involved. And in America, we have a system of due process. If we just start shoveling out names, look, I am all for making sure these young women that were perpetrated get justice. But we've got to do it within the system. And so I think a lot of the material is held by the courts or is inappropriate to be released. And it would do the administration good to lean into that a little bit more, to explain the information they have and why they can't release it, what they have and what they don't. But to be honest with you, part of this was self-created by the Attorney General. She brought out binders. She handed them out that seemed to indicate that there was a ton of information in there. When there wasn't, they then said at the end of the binder, well, more to come, leaving people to believe that there was a lot more there. And so it's hard to now turn around and say, well, there's never been anything there, or we can't release it to you. So, you know, they kind of did create some of this, and they need to have the Attorney General, probably herself, go out there and explain the situation a little bit more, because I think the base, rightly so, wants a greater degree of transparency.
OK, that's the ghost of Jeffrey Epstein. Let's talk about another ghost, and that's Joe Biden. He's defended his use of the autopen to sign last-minute pardons. But in defending the pardons and the way in which they were done, Biden's made a startling admission. He told the New York Times that he made every decision himself about who would receive clemency, but then he admitted he didn't explicitly agree to each and every clemency winner. Rather, he gave oral approval to a general sort of framework about the kinds of people who would receive pardons, and then White House staff would use the autopen to sign pardons for people they believed fitted within the framework. That's a lot of power in the hands of Biden's staff.
Yeah, but look, the details matter in this, right? So let's just be clear. Every politician in America, that's not true. A lot of politicians use an autopen. I don't really care. I use DocuSigns all the time, right? The question isn't how you sign your name. It's whether you intended to do it or not, right? So if somebody hacks my computer and starts signing my name on mortgage documents, whether it's my signature or not is irrelevant. It was never the intent, and that wouldn't hold up in a court of law. So what's missing here is the context. context. And you alluded to this. In the story, Biden says explicitly with respect to pardons, which is something that the Constitution delegates solely to the President of the United States, that he gave broad parameters to his chief of staff, Jeff Zients, who then sort of decided who was the one that signed off. Now, again, remember, the details matter here. The Constitution says that that power lies exclusively with the President of the United States, not with the White House chief of staff or anybody else working in the White House. So there's, I think, a strong case to be made, whether it's auto-penned or not, doesn't matter. It's not about how the document was signed, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer. But what matters is the president never knew that an action, whether it's a pardon or a bill signing, occurred that he knew about, then it didn't happen. It's, again, I don't know that it matters if it's a bill signing, a pardon, or a mortgage document. It wouldn't hold up in a court of law.
It's a fascinating one. Will this go any further, or is this just going to be left alone by the Trump administration?
It's an interesting question because I actually testified in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee just over a week ago. And one of the lawyers posited that basically it needs to get tested. So in other words, let's say I got a pardon and somebody then tried to prosecute me. And they would say, well, that pardon actually wasn't made in a legal binding way. So you'd have to challenge the pardon in some way, shape, or form, or some other action that the president took. I don't know, at least from the lawyers that I talked to, that you could just say that it doesn't count. There would have to be a legal action. So the president would have to prosecute someone, or the Department of Justice, rather. And then they'd have to make the case that the pardon that protects them isn't valid. So you'd have to see an action challenging it. And that begs the question that you're asking, is that going to happen?
It'll be interesting to watch and see if it does. Zoran Mamdani is the front runner to become New York mayor, and we continue to discover just how radical he is, not just his social policies, but his apparent embrace of radical Islam. The New York Post is reporting today that Mamdani's former communications and policy intern was just last year encouraging supporters to get arrested in their struggle against the West. Hadika Malik, speaking on a webinar entitled Islamic Political Activism, said, "The true believer knows that none of this is in vain, that this is all jihad. So the conversation of doxing, conversation of getting arrested and suspended, I think it's time for Muslims to start to say, all right, so what? If you get suspended or doxed, because it's bound to happen, when you're doing something for the sake of Allah here in the West, it will never, ever be in vain, and the true believer does not fear that." Sean, the more we learn about the Democrat candidate and his associates, the more worrying.
Yeah, let me give you a news flash. You've spent more time on Australian television covering this than most of the U.S. media combined, right? Last week, there was an instance where he said some really radical things about policing and victims of domestic violence, and basically no one covered it. And what's happening now is that the media in America is largely, not I say largely, almost entirely, giving him a pass on all of these things: his beliefs, his background, and his policies, people that he surrounded himself with. So, look, I wish I could say I was surprised by this. But as I said, I mean, just think about this. Your audience needs to understand that you, in Australia, have now spent more time than the collective U.S., New York, or New York City media probably combined on questioning his policies and the people that he's surrounding himself with. And that should be a very scary proposition.
Well, you've made a great case, Sean, for why more Americans should watch Sky News Australia.
Sky News.
Hey, thanks for joining me tonight. It's always a joy to speak to you. Thanks so much.
You bet.